Your own mind is currently functioning as an elite, high-security prison, and you are the warden torturing yourself for free. This is the incredible story of a 31-year-old glassblower who found himself completely paralyzed by creative anxiety, destroying his lungs from stress, and on the absolute verge of burning down his entire lineage. What he discovered hidden inside the fluid mechanics of a raging mountain river didn't just clear his mental static, it transformed him into a world-renowned structural artist whose installations are commissioned by major architectural firms worldwide. The hidden cognitive shift he deployed requires zero cost, completely shattering the illusion that you must solve your life before you can start living it. Oliver stood in the suffocating heat of his small workshop, the roar of the gas furnace vibrating through the soles of his boots. At 31, his life felt like a massive tangled ball of wire. He was a third-generation glassblower, a man who possessed a deep, soulful understanding of fire, sand, and chemical pigments. He could look at a raw, molten glob of glowing silicate and visualize a breathtaking, fluid sculpture that captured the movement of wind through water. His deepest dream was to design a massive, suspended stained glass atrium for the city's international cultural terminal, a project that would solidify his family's name in artistic history. Yet, Oliver carried a heavy, silent mental flaw that kept his hands trembling and his shelves empty. He was an aggressive, chronic overthinker. Before he even picked up his blowing iron, his mind would run 10,000s of simulations of failure. He would worry about the exact ambient humidity cooling the glass too fast, the potential microscopic air bubbles hiding in the crucible, or whether the color gradient would look outdated in 5 years. He treated his mind like a courtroom where every creative idea was cross-examined until it was executed before it could breathe. He spent his afternoons drawing endlessly complex blueprints and writing hundreds of pages of mathematical calculations, completely ignoring the physical medium. The intense emotional pain of this mental paralysis slowly and systematically fractured his daily reality. His younger sister, who relied on the workshop's revenue to fund her college education, had to pause her enrollment because Oliver hadn't completed a major production order in 4 months. Seeing her pack her bags and head to a low-paying retail job, her eyes quiet with disappointment, left Oliver with a profound, crushing sense of failure. He returned to the furnace room that night, his chest tightening so severely that he dropped a batch of raw lithium powder into the wrong bucket, ruining his expensive chemical stock. His mental static wasn't protecting him. It was actively destroying his family's survival. He fell behind on his commercial heating bills. The local gas company threatened to cut off the high-pressure fuel lines to his kiln, and he spent his nights pacing the floor, trapped in a severe loop of insomnia. His throat felt dry, his lungs ached from the nervous, shallow breathing of chronic anxiety, and every single day felt like an uphill battle against a phantom enemy inside his own skull. The ultimate crisis struck on a stifling midsummer morning. The representative from the Cultural Terminal Selection Board arrived at the studio to view Oliver's preliminary glass prototype. Oliver had spent 3 weeks straight staring at the raw materials, mentally debating the exact temperature parameters, and completely redesigning the structural layout in his head without ever making a physical pull. When the representative asked to see the physical mock-up, Oliver could only show him a room filled with crumpled sketches and a cold, empty furnace. The representative shook his head with cold professionalism, canceled the evaluation meeting, and informed Oliver that if a completed, structural glass sculpture wasn't delivered to the gallery for public display in exactly 25 days, his application would be permanently discarded. The moment the door clicked shut, Oliver fell to his knees on the concrete floor, his mind spinning so fast he vomited from pure panic. He had spent his entire adult life trying to think his way out of mistakes, and his reward was a completely empty room and a broken legacy. That evening, unable to bear the heat of his own silent studio, Oliver walked blindly up into the jagged hills surrounding the valley until he reached a deep, isolated canyon where a massive mountain river carved through the black granite stone. Sitting by the edge of the raging white water was a 74-year-old traditional stonemason named Joshua. Joshua was a legendary builder who had constructed the valley's massive historic aqueducts using no mortar, relying purely on the natural weight and balance of raw stone. He sat on a flat boulder, slowly carving a small river stone with a hand chisel, his movements completely relaxed, unhurried, and quiet. Joshua noticed Oliver staring at the roaring river with a manic, wild expression in his eyes. "You look like a man who is trying to carry the entire weight of the mountain in his arms, instead of just walking up the path," Joshua said, his voice deep and steady like the current. "My mind won't shut up," Oliver said, his voice cracking with intense raw emotion. "I have 25 days to build a masterpiece that requires absolute technical perfection. If I make one wrong move with the glass, it shatters. If the temperature drops 5 degrees, it cracks. I'm trying to calculate every single variable, but the more I think, the more paralyzed I become." Joshua picked up an empty, hollow clay pot from beside his seat. He dipped it into the roaring river, filling it to the absolute brim with muddy, turbulent water, then slammed it down on the rock in front of Oliver. "Look inside," Joshua commanded. Oliver leaned over, looking at the swirling, muddy liquid. "It's chaotic, it's dirty, I can't see the bottom." Joshua stood up, took a heavy iron hammer, and smashed the clay pot into 100 pieces. The muddy water instantly rushed out, spilling across the flat granite and cascading back into the river, leaving the stone beneath it completely clean, wet, and gleaming in the moonlight. "Your mind is that clay pot, Oliver," Joshua said softly. "You think you are being smart by collecting every single worry, every calculation, and every fear inside your head, keeping it stagnant, but in full mind is a dead weight. The river doesn't navigate the canyon by calculating the position of every boulder before it hits them. It flows because it empties itself of resistance. It adapts to the stone by moving immediately into the next available space. You don't need more calculations, glassblower. You need to break the pot. You must learn to think through your hands, not through your anxiety." Joshua leaned forward, his sharp eyes pinning Oliver to the spot. "For the next 21 days, you will execute the external action protocol. You will completely banish the pencil, the drafting paper, and the mental simulations from your studio. Every morning, the exact moment your furnace hits temperature, you will dip your iron into the glass within 60 seconds. You are forbidden from thinking about the final shape. You will simply make one physical pull, one twist, or one blow. If it shatters, you immediately throw the broken shards into the recycle bin and start the next pull within 2 minutes. No analyzing why it broke. No sitting down to think about your mistakes. Let the movement empty the vessel." The next morning, Oliver stood before the glowing maw of his kiln at 5:30 a.m., his body trembling. The internal resistance from his own mind was an absolute wall of mental fire. As he reached for the blowing iron, his brain flooded with a tidal wave of panic, screaming that he was going to waste expensive propane, that the glass would collapse into a shapeless blob, and that he was going to humiliate his family's history. He sat down on a wooden bench, his chest heaving, his old habits pulling him toward his drafting table to write down another safety checklist. He sat there for 20 minutes, completely locked in place by his own fear. But the memory of Joshua's heavy iron hammer smashing the clay pot echoed in his mind. He stood up, grabbed the heavy iron pipe, and plunged it directly into the white-hot molten glass without looking at his notes. He pulled out a glowing, liquid sphere. His brain began to scream for a plan, but Oliver forced his hands to move. He blew a single puff of air into the pipe, watched the glass expand slightly unevenly, and immediately rolled it across the steel marver block. The glass cooled too quickly and fractured with a sharp sound. The old Oliver would have sat down for 3 hours to calculate the exact thermal coefficient of the steel block. Instead, he forced himself to execute the protocol. He unclipped the broken piece, dropped it into the iron scrap bin, dipped the pipe back into the furnace, and started the next piece within 90 seconds. This mechanical, thoughtless repetition began to alter his entire neural biology. By the 4th day of continuous action, a small, remarkable discovery surfaced inside his awareness. Because his mind was forbidden from analyzing the failures, his hands began to develop a deep, instinctual intelligence of their own. He could suddenly feel the exact viscosity of the liquid silica through the vibration of the iron pipe. He didn't need to calculate the temperature. His fingers knew when the glass was ready to bend based on the way it pulled against his wrists. He stopped fighting the medium. He was no longer trying to force the material into a rigid, predetermined mental prison. He was flowing with it, adapting to the flaws in real time, just like the river navigating the granite boulders. Small, beautiful signs of success began to populate his workshop shelves. He wasn't producing perfect drawings anymore. He was producing massive volumes of raw organic glass forms. Some were twisted like frozen waves, Others were hollow spheres that held the ambient light like liquid diamonds. His growing confidence transformed the entire atmosphere of his studio. The frantic, nervous energy that had plagued his movements for a decade completely vanished, replaced by a deep, stoic, and silent rhythm. He worked 12 hours a day, yet he no longer felt exhausted because he wasn't burning his vital energy on internal arguments. A massive new challenge struck on the 16th night of his protocol. Oliver was in the middle of executing his largest structural test piece, a foot delicate ribbon of amber and cobalt glass that required a seamless dual-axis twist. As he was performing the final, critical pull, the high-pressure gas regulator on his primary furnace failed due to years of neglected maintenance. The roar of the kiln suddenly died, and the ambient temperature in the room plummeted instantly. The molten glass on his iron pipe began to dull from a brilliant orange to a deadly, solid gray-brown. In the past, this mechanical disaster would have caused an absolute mental shutdown. Oliver would have panicked, yelled at the universe, cursed his bad luck, and abandoned the project entirely to slide back into a dark depression. But his mind was now completely empty of stagnant resistance. He didn't waste a fraction of a second on anger, and he didn't check his calculations. He moved with the instantaneous fluidity of rushing water. He bypassed the main furnace, carried the cooling iron over to his smaller, secondary glory hole kiln, restarted the auxiliary fuel lines manually with a flint sparker, and used the concentrated, smaller flame to reheat only the specific joints of the glass ribbon that were losing their elasticity. He adapted his entire artistic concept on the fly. Because the glass had cooled slightly unevenly in the center, he deliberately twisted the structural deformities into a deep, spiraling vortex that added a breathtaking, three-dimensional depth to the sculpture that he could have never designed on paper. The result was an absolute masterpiece of spontaneous engineering. When the final day of the selection board arrived, Oliver didn't show the judges a collection of neat blueprints or perfect mathematical tables. He led them into a gallery space lit by warm spotlights, where he had suspended a magnificent 20-foot installation of interlocking, fluid glass structures that looked like a running river frozen in mid-air. The amber and cobalt spirals caught the morning light, casting an intricate, moving dance of shadows across the white gallery walls. It possessed a raw, breathing soul that left the selection committee standing in an absolute dead silence for nearly 2 minutes. The executive director turned to Oliver, his face filled with genuine awe. Every artist we reviewed sent us hundreds of pages of digital renders and perfect structural concepts, Oliver. But your work looks like it was born from the environment itself. How did you design something this complex without a single blueprint? I didn't design it, Oliver said, his voice calm, quiet, and completely steady. I stopped trying to think about the masterpiece, and I just let the fire tell my hands what to do next. The National Heritage Board didn't just award Oliver the primary contract for the International Cultural Terminal Atrium. They designated his installation as a permanent historical landmark for the city, providing him with a multi-million-dollar advancement budget that completely secured his family's workshop for generations to come. His sister returned to her studies, her tuition fully paid for the next 4 years, and the family workshop became a thriving institute of experimental glass design. The physical transformation was undeniable. Oliver was healthy, his skin clear, his breathing deep and steady, and he walked with the unhurried grace of a master craftsman. But the ultimate breakthrough was entirely internal. Oliver had repaired his relationship with his own creative spirit. He no longer looked at a new day with a sense of suffocating anxiety or dread. He understood that his artistic genius was not a product of how much data he could collect or how many problems he could anticipate inside his head. It was the direct reward of his willingness to empty the vessel, step up to the furnace, and engage with the raw material of his today. My friend, this story is not really about glass-blowing furnace temperatures or historic art installations. It is a profound psychological mirror showing you the exact danger of treating your mind like a storage house for anxiety, doubt, and constant overthinking. Every single hour you spend running simulations of failure, analyzing your past mistakes, or waiting for a perfect mental scenario before you begin your work is a piece of your life you are actively suffocating. The static in your head is a liar. The question is not whether you have the intelligence to solve your life's problems. The question is whether you have the raw courage to break the clay pot, empty your mind, and trust your hands to do the work right now. Pick up your tools and begin.